The 1960s, the decade known for altering the societal status quo, jump-starting modern life as we know it. In this decade, freedom was promoted in all spheres, including film with the abolishment of the Hays Code and the introduction of the new Hollywood era, the civil rights movement, and protest songs within the music industry created by the likes of Bob Dylan, to name a few, encouraging the attitude of revolution and change. Furthermore, iconic events such as the Vietnam War and moon landing would have a significant impact upon society for years to come. However, this idea of change and reinvention was found in its earliest form in the first few years of this exhilarating decade, as the arrival of two groups would shake the conventions and preconceptions of the mediums which they occupied, forever changing them. The year is 1961. The comics industry was once again undergoing a rather dramatic change as the implementation of the Comics Code into books forced companies to bring back the genre of superhero comics, which had once thrived in the 1940s but had fallen to the wayside in the post-war landscape. 1956's Showcase number 4 is what many often refer to as the start of the Silver Age of comics, as Barry Allen paved the way for the return of superheroes into pop culture. However, for comics writer Stan Lee, this wasn't enough. He believed that simply portraying the inhuman feats of the hero felt rather flat and uninteresting. When tasked with creating a superhero team to rival DC's Justice League of America, Lee decided to write the team as though they were real people, giving them relatable everyday problems and issues which they would be forced to overcome, alongside their out-of-this-world superhero adventures. On November 1st, the Fantastic Four would grace comic stands, written by Lee and illustrated by the iconic Jack Kirby, introducing the world to Marvel's first family.
Now!
Not this time, Magneto.
It's impossible! How did you do it?
My gun isn't real. I made it out of wood.
What?
The issue revealed the members of the Fantastic Four to have gained their powers whilst on a space mission, coming into contact with unknown cosmic rays which permanently altered them. Upon landing back on Earth, the four heroes began to change. Scientist Reed Richards gained the ability to stretch his body in unbelievable ways. His girlfriend Sue Storm was able to turn herself invisible and later create energy force fields. Her brother Johnny Storm could light himself on fire, allowing him to fly and throw fireballs. However, the most tragic of the four was Reed's best friend Ben Grimm, whose skin was permanently converted to rock, being unable to transform back and forth like the Hulk. The four would decide to use their powers for good, establishing their base within the New York Baxter Building, and began going on various cosmic adventures, facing foes such as the Skrulls, the Mole Man, and their most iconic enemy, Dr. Doom, arguably the greatest villain in comics.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles, bring them on!
On the 11th of January 1963, in the UK, the song Please Please Me by the relatively new Liverpool band The Beatles was released, becoming their first #1 single in the UK, with the song She Loves You released in August becoming the fastest selling record up until that time in the UK. The group consisted of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, who formed a songwriting partnership, writing the majority of the band's songs in these early years, alongside George Harrison and Ringo Starr, who would come into their own later in the band's career. While the group was steadily gaining popularity in the UK, it wasn't until their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show on the 9th of February 1964 that they would truly rise to the top, becoming globally recognised, kickstarting what is often referred to as Beatlemania. The group would begin releasing #1 hit after #1 hit, including I Wanna Hold Your Hand, 8 Days a Week and Ticket to Ride, to name a few. Their popularity would see them touring all over the world and getting their own animated cartoon series, as well as 2 feature films, A Hard Day's Night and Help, further cementing the group's popularity and appeal with audiences.
Hello, grandfather. Hello. He can talk then, can he?
Of course he can talk, he's a human being, isn't he?
Well, if he's your grandfather, who knows?
Many of the early songs of the group were heavily inspired by the likes of Buddy Holly, Elvis Presley, Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers, feeding into the established pop music of the time in a unique way. However, their complete redefinition of popular music would begin to come into effect with their album Rubber Soul, with songs such as Norwegian Wood, with its use of the sitar, and Nowhere Man, sounding unlike anything audiences would hear from mainstream artists at the time. This would seem to be grown and redefined as they continued their careers, with their album Revolver, and later in their 1967 magnum opus, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was heavily influenced by the group's integration of LSD into their lifestyle, with songs such as A Day in the Life being truly revolutionary. Much like with the Fantastic Four in the comics world, the Beatles truly left an impact on the music industry, showing what could truly be achieved in the music landscape, inspiring their contemporaries, evident in the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, as well as for generations to come, with Oasis famously taking heavy inspiration from the group. They would continue to innovate with the iconic White Album and my personal favourite Abbey Road, where George Harrison truly began to shine with songs such as Here Comes the Sun and Something. Unfortunately, the group began to drift apart, releasing their final album Let It Be in 1970 before going their separate ways, undergoing successful solo careers. However, these two revolutionary groups didn't simply coexist within the same time period. They did in fact interact and cross over. I will now go over the crossover in question. In the issue Fantastic Four number 34, the Thing receives a Beatles wig in the mail. What, is that not good enough? Don't worry, this was followed up by a full-on connection in Strange Tales number 130, in which the girlfriends of the Human Torch and Thing attend a Beatles concert. Although the two miss the performance fighting crime, the Fab Four do in fact physically appear briefly within the issue, although they don't speak, which comes across as rather unnatural as the band were known for their witty exchanges in these early years. Later in Fantastic Four Annual number 3, Reed and Sue are finally married, with Alex Ross's later recreation of this scene in Marvel's number 2, showing the members of the Fab Four in attendance at this important historical event in the world of Marvel, alongside other famous faces of the time. Additionally, more recent comics have seen the introduction of a group of shape-shifting Skrulls who have taken on the forms of the 4 Beatles members in their attempt to take over Earth, with the John Skrull imposter having the largest role, although they were all subsequently killed. I think it would have been amusing if the writers had played upon the Paul is dead conspiracies of the 60s, implying that the group replaced him with a Skrull imposter who looked identical to him. Now, where was this in the recent Secret Invasion series? Let me take you down. Furthermore, these connections between the two groups extend to the medium of film. Director Peyton Reed has mentioned on various occasions about his pitch for a Fantastic Four film, which would see the group in their original 1960s setting, with a playful and fun style inspired by Richard Lester's A Hard Day's Night. The FF are one of the only superhero teams whose identities are public knowledge, allowing for them to have a similar Beatlemania style of popularity, which Lester's film features prominently. Additionally, the 2022 film Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness introduces an alternate universe version of Reed Richards, played by John Krasinski. Upon learning about him and the Fantastic Four, Strange asks whether they charted in the 60s, of course referencing the Beatles, who were often called the Fab Four at the time, once again drawing attention to the connected nature of the two groups.
As I was saying, kids, I expect each and every one of you to really...
Now, overall, it is clear that both the Beatles and the Fantastic Four set new standards within the music and comic industries respectively, highlighting new and engaging ways to update old conventions and expectations for audiences for the better. In light of the connections and references between the two groups, I think it would be fun if Marvel could somehow make some sort of comic crossover between the two. Perhaps the FF travelling in the Yellow Submarine with the Beatles to stop Dr. Doom's plan to capture Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. With Disney now owning Marvel and the Beatles' Get Back documentary recently debuting on Disney+, it could one day happen.